So welcome to all of you to this launching of the second phase for fair recruitment. My name is Francesco Carrella. I am the regional expert of the ILO and going to be with you for this activities. For the next 2.5 hours, we're going to have representatives of Latin American governments, workers, employers, and we're all going to talk about fair recruitment. So this is a space for exchanging, and because we want to make sure that social dialogue will be possible for everybody. So we are on Zoom, we are on the YouTube channel of the ILO and also with other methods. So you can follow us on Zoom and you can share this event with Contratación Equitativa, Migración Laboral, Migrantes en Acción, Fair Recruitment and Migrant Workers. So for those who are with us in Zoom, you can follow us in either English or Spanish. So all you need to do is to select the language that suits you best. So most of the people will be talking in Spanish, but there's also going to be people who will talk in English. So then, of course, any kind of document that we're going to use is going to be available in the future on the different platforms. So thank you for being with us today from different continents, and we trust that you will get ideas that will surely be very helpful for each of your country. Let us now proceed with the official opening. We have Mr. Vinicius Carvalho Pinheiro, Assistant Director General and Regional Director, Latin America and the Caribbean. Ms. Sharon Burrow, General Secretary, International Trade Union Confederation. Mr. Roberto Suarez Santos, Secretary General, International Organization of Employers. So it is now Mr. Vinicius Carvalho Pinheiro's turn. So thank you very much, Francesco, and a very special greeting to all the people who are connected to this event. I would like to especially greet Ms. Sharon Barrow and obviously Roberto Suarez. I don't know if you can hear me well, and if you could take away the initial slide, perfect. That's so I can see the face of the people who are linked and connected with us. So the idea is to talk about decent work. We can consider the fair recruitment is the open door to decent work for workers of all genders. And of course, when you do this in a legal framework and when you respect the international labor standard, this is extremely important for employers because it obviously responds to their needs, and it is obviously fundamental for workers, for national workers, but also migrant workers. So if it is well done, it favors everybody, governments, employers, and workers, whether they are migrants or not. So we are talking about a context which is extremely special. So Latin America has been the region where the pandemic has actually created the worst problems. We have a situation, an economic situation, which is absolutely amazing. So it's actually been a disaster, an economic disaster. And obviously, so it means we have millions of people who have lost their jobs, jobs that disappeared. We're talking about 2.8 million companies that went broke. So it's been like a thunderstorm. It's been like havoc has been created. So Of course, now what we want to do is to get started again, obviously. But obviously, most of the jobs that have gone lost are informal jobs, and also the jobs that are being generated are low quality jobs. So which means that the crisis has left us more vulnerable to any other crisis, and also it creates obstacles to all sorts of policies, even sanitary policies, in order to somehow stop the pandemic. So the pandemic has made the recruitment even more complex, especially at international level. And of course, also the recruitment agencies and governments are feeling in a very special but negative situation. So we have people who are in a situation of total insecurity. We have also the agencies that have gone out of business because of the pandemic. And so, of course, the most important thing now would be to get started, obviously doing things correctly. And but of course, this is not going to be very easy. But we have to understand that there are also mafias that control all the irregular jobs, all of the informal jobs. So once again, we have had a paralysis of the marketplace. So, and now what we are seeing now is something that is starting to open up again. But still, so the context is extremely challenging. Social dialogue is extremely important. So what I wanted to say is that I want to congratulate this initiative, because the goal is crucial. We have to talk about rights, and we have to start considering that all this is absolutely fundamental, this new process that has to start. So once again, we have in front of us the challenge of overcoming all the obstacles that the pandemic has left us. So I would like to thank everybody for this engagement. And of course, we're going to be very careful and very attentive. So thank you very much to all of you, and I'm giving the floor back to all of you. So thank you very much, Regional Director, for your words. And now we have Sharon Barrow, who is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. And Vinicius, thank you very much for your leadership in this regard. But indeed, to the specialists and of course the social partners in Latin America, I'm really delighted that this initiative is on the table, because nobody can deny that with the breakdown in our economies, with the increasing conflict, with the economic and social despair that's accorded to that, and of course with the hardening of a world where xenophobia is on the rise again, we are seeing the treatment of migrant workers and asylum seekers and refugees being, absolutely, again, simply there's a denial of global responsibility for people. And if we don't put people and the planet at the center of a just recovery, then we will see ourselves where the cost of increasing despair, increasing anger, increasing conflict. So at the heart of that, we believe that unless you have democratic rights and freedoms, and that includes, of course, the rights outlined in the migrant conventions, indeed the refugee convention, and of course the fair recruitment initiatives, the rules of fair recruitment, that unless we actually see these implemented in law and practice, then the exclusion of workers in all of our regions, but particularly as you look at those borders and the lineup of workers wanting to get into the country, with some hope of what we call a social contract, some hope of jobs, good jobs, decent work, some hope of being in a rights-based environment where they can trust that they have fundamental rights. And of course, where they know that social protection will give them a floor of resilience if they can't actually weather the shocks, whether they're global, national, or personal. But of course, also the issues for women. The majority of women, of migrants, are still women. And indeed, if we don't tackle these questions, then we can't see our way clear to realising an inclusive future where the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement go hand in hand. So rebuilding with a just recovery, with a foundation of resilience, requires that we do not leave workers that are in the migrant communities or in the refugee or asylum seeker communities behind. And the ILO, holds the mandate for working with social partners to effect this change. It is despairing for the individuals themselves, but for unions to watch people being excluded, first of all, from their countries, and then, of course, from decent work, is something that we can't stand back and ignore. So it starts with fair recruitment. Of course, you have a right to asylum, a right to seek safe haven. But beyond that, for the world of work, if we're not recruiting people fairly, if we're not affording them rights and just wages with equal treatment, then we're actually seeing these workers enslaved. And that's what we're seeing all around the world. It's intriguing for me to see that despite all of the work that's been done at the ILO, we are still having to convince ministers of trade, ministers of finance, leaders themselves, that indeed jobs, decent work, inclusion are at the heart of sustainable economies. We know that where we've had to fight against forced labour, that indeed this has been the scourge, the worst harm, whether it's adult or child labour, forced labour for adults or child labour. This is modern slavery. And it's hard to understand why in the 21st century, workers can still effectively be owned by one other person, the employer, and that the rules actually provide legitimacy for that. So unless we establish that rights base, unless we invest in jobs, and to get to full employment, which I'm delighted to see that the G7 trade ministers just reinforced. And I see, Thea Lee in my screen here, and I know no one's fought harder than her for the rights base of global trade, and to see the G7 ministers commit to, first of all, eliminate forced labour in supply chains, but also to call for the due diligence and the vigilance around the UN business and human rights principles is heartening. And I know that the Trade Secretary of the US, working with the AFL and indeed the policy experts like Thea, are really pushing that agenda. So we need to do so much more. Fair recruitment is at the heart of this, and I thank you very much for this initiative. It's great to see the ILO at the heart of these discussions. It's even more, encouraging for me to see the social partners sitting down and talking about the fact that all workers must have decent work. And I want to leave you with a picture. We saw our global supply chains break down, or at least become, really constrained during COVID, the first phase, second phase, third phase of COVID-19. I think we're in our fourth phase now. But now you're seeing constraints because people have shut the doors to migrant workers, to asylum seekers. You can't get enough truck drivers. You can't get production workers. You can't get construction workers. Despite the situation, the world economy is continuing to try to operate. And it's the very heart of decent work and employment that is preventing some of the emergency trade environment through supply chain. So we need to make sure we're inclusive, there's a rights base, and we're investing in the jobs everywhere to make sure that when migrant workers do choose to leave their country, it's by choice and they're welcome in other countries with fair treatment, with equal treatment and fair recruitment guarantees. Thank you all very much.
Le agradecemos, señora Barrow, su intervención.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barrow, for your kind words. Now we have Mr. Roberto Santos, who is the General Secretary of the International Employment Organization. Thank you very much, Francisco. Thanks to the ILO, thanks to Vinicius, and also to Ms. Sharon. And also to all the different ministers, all the different people who are connected with us today. So we are not only happy, but also proud, I would say, being part of this initiative. This is the second initiative for fair recruitment in the Americas. So we have insisted enormously on this idea. We have tried to do our very best with everything that has to do with fair recruitment, fair migration, etc. So I believe that this is a starting point of a trip that will last 5 years. And so what do we expect? What are we looking for in these 5 years? So how do we consider this initiative? We believe it has to be implemented. So I would like to mention our perspective. So fair recruitment. So these are for us a real interest. So far beyond social responsibilities, social inclusion, social whatever. So the rest can be communication. We're talking about different business case and different examples. But I believe that fair recruitment is the heart and the soul of this initiative. And of course, the lack of mobility is giving us problems in the short, medium, and long term. So we need data. Of course, we need also reliable data. We need organizations to provide us with a relatively trustworthy data, of course, because this year we have made a study, a very important study that was showing how during the pandemic, all the pharmaceutical industry and as a consequence of the restrictions to mobility, and also the fact that we could not have access to qualifications, it was very difficult to find migrant workers who could start not just treatments or vaccines, etc. So this is what is actually happening nowadays. So we're looking at a phenomenon where we truly need more people. So the companies can't find the suitable people, whether it's Italy or Spain or the United Kingdom. We're also talking about developing countries like obviously United States. They're very conscious that there is a small number of people who have the correct qualifications. But anyway, we, the employers, when we touch upon the migrant issues, we have always tried to do this with great courage, and I'm being very modest, with courage, because it is difficult to change the rhetoric in different countries. So in the different fora, and so especially when we talk about in public forum and also face-to-face dialogues. We need that your help. We need your help. We need to change the rhetoric. So this is a very recent initiative because we have to change all this in favor of recruitment and also migration. So this goes way beyond growth and all sorts of other issues. And in order to do this, we need to make it very, very clear, and also with the facts, that we are engaged, we are willing to set up initiatives that will protect migrant workers and vulnerable workers. So we're going to engage in all the initiatives that want to create the correct conditions for, and also for the employment agencies, to make sure that these conditions will be respected. We don't want abusive practices anymore. We don't want people who are recruited in an illicit manner. On the contrary. So, of course, maybe this is the moment that the Fair Recruitment Initiative by the ILO has to be more strategic. So we're talking about different issues. So on the one hand, we have to avoid that the labor markets will turn into something extremely restrictive, restricting mobility, etc. We have to put more pressure in the flexibility or access to recruitment. And this is the reason why the employment agency, the private ones, the public ones, are fundamental. They are crucial intermediaries. So we're talking about more than 54 million people who do this kind of job, illicit, legal, and obviously, so these are fundamental for companies, but also for nations. So obviously, they cannot replace anybody else, but of course the private employment agencies cannot replace the public ones, but still they play a very important role. We need institutions that work. We need practices that have to be correct. So, and of course there are many countries, especially in my region, where the framework, the legal framework, is not at all suitable, is not adequate. So we want to limit any kind of illegal recruitment. We have the tools, the ILO has given us perfect tools. And of course, we need the legal frameworks to be more suitable, more adequate, and we need the practices to be in line with our requirements and needs. So we can create an impact. We have 5 years ahead of us. We can do this together with the trade unions. We can do it with employers. We can do it with ministries. And of course, we need to push something that will be more strategic. So thank you very much for the initiative. Thank you very much for having allowed me to talk. And I'm going to be a very careful listener. So thank you very much, Mr. Suarez, for your very kind words.
Its beginning, the Fair Recruitment Initiative was trying to, it's always aimed to start strong alliances with international local partners that will complement the international commitment regarding human rights and sustainable development. After the first phase, it obtained important achievement and created new tools. During the second phases that will be developed from 2021 to 2025, as Mr. Sora was saying, practices and knowledge are analyzed thoroughly, translated into practice, and embraced by institutions to provide better lives to workers, specifically to migrant workers. During these times, ILO tries, in partnership with other stakeholders, to support the legislative and practical reform to make fair recruitment universal. Starting from tripartite dialogue, ILO will also try to establish national and transnational recruitment policies and practices based on the compliance with international labor standards and with a gender perspective. We believe that fair recruitment could be essential in the regional employment policies. We'll later see some concrete examples of the step forward taken by some countries of the Americas. This virtual state is now becoming a high-level ministerial panel. 5 countries from this region will give us an overview of what has been done and is still being done in the last few years to make fair recruitment real. Mr. Vinicius Pinheiro is the moderator of this space, but before that, please listen to the workers who have lived through a fair recruitment process. This clip that you're going to see is part of the Reframe project, supported by the European Union, that we are thanking this institution and congratulate this fair institution for their contribution to the fair recruitment of the region.
La contratación equitativa busca mejorar normas de contratación sin costo para los trabajadores y asegurando protección de derechos laborales, para que nadie sufra condiciones de trabajo injustas mediante la coacción o engaño, ya sea en el propio país o cuando se es contratado en el extranjero.
Porque muchas personas se aprovechan por este lado, donde le dicen a uno, miren, vámonos allá, o tan siquiera por enseñarles, vámonos y les cobramos tanto. Entonces, en este caso no, pero sí siempre hay personas que se aprovechan de esto y así que el contrato es directo al Ministerio de Trabajo, nada que contratos fuera, ni personas que nos contraten fuera, no nos dejemos engañar, ¿verdad? Porque nos ofrecen. Sinceramente a mí me ha pasado, me estafaron en una ocasión, me ofrecieron visa para Estados Unidos, perdí 6,000 quetzales.
La verdad, lo que me motivó a mí venir es porque necesito salir adelante, ¿verdad? Y sacar adelante a mis hijos, ¿verdad? Primeramente Dios y darle un buen futuro a mis hijos.
Gracias al gran esfuerzo que el gobierno ha realizado, ¿verdad? Juntamente con sus ministros, pues ahora, ¿verdad? Gozamos de este grande beneficio que se nos trata con igualdad a todos.
Bueno, el director regional tiene ahora la palabra.
Well, the floor is now to the regional director. Thank you very much, Francesco. The message of this clip is that fair recruitment is a win-win solution for everybody involved, not just the workers, but it's also positive for employers and recruitment agencies and everybody, governments and everybody else. So now we have high-quality panel, 5 ministries for different regions of the Americas and the Caribbean. And it's not very common to listen to so many ministers speaking at once. So I've got the pleasure to introduce Mrs. Silvia Lara Povedano, Minister of Labor and Social Security in Costa Rica, Mr. Patricio Donoso Chiriboga, Minister of Labor of Ecuador, Rafael Eugenio Rodriguez, Minister of Labor and Social Welfare Guatemala, and Secretary of Labor and Social Welfare Mexico, Luis María Alcalde, and Thea Mailey, Deputy Undersecretary, International Affairs, Department of Labor, United States of America. So I would like to say hello to all of the ministers virtually, and in June this year, government employees and workers from 181 countries gathered together for the International Labor Conference, where a global call to action for a human-centered recovery from the COVID-19 crisis was approved unanimously. So this is important for the employment, not just the economy, but for the people. So according to this global call, in this panel, I would like to listen, but we're going to listen to very interesting experiences. I would like to start off with Costa Rica. I would like to ask a question to the minister. During the COVID-19 pandemic, which were the main challenges to comply with fair recruitment during the implementation of bilateral agreements with Nicaragua and Panama? And what did the Labor Ministry to do? What did the Labor Ministry do to overcome these challenges? Well, thank you very much, and Mr. Carvalho Pinheiro and everybody else. And I would like to say hello to all of my colleagues in the different countries here mentioned, and all of the people that are here with us in the launch of this second phase. So during the years, Costa Rica, in different time, has established bilateral agreements with Nicaragua and Panama to regulate liberal migration towards our country, specifically cross-border migration that in to comply with some seasonal demands, such as for bananas and coffee harvesting time. So we we have different factors that determine what we have done in this sense, but two specific factors that strengthen each other's mutual. So for one of the well, the borders were closed, and the employers recognize their need to have new practices to make to attract labor force for the harvesting work, and every and these access to the country had to be safe for all of the migrant workers. And these, well, thanks to that, we had protocol for action. We drafted a call for action describing some specific characteristics to of this migration that with marked before and one after. So we had a new corridor, and we understand fair recruitment better. And first of all, I'd like to highlight some elements. So we uh, so the person that had to enter the country was need to be authorized, and had to be also, previously inspected by the health system in order for the migrant workers to have a fair health care and fair access to food. And many companies had to improve the working condition and the living condition, because these conditions would have been checked beforehand, before the workers came. And the cost, the recruitment cost, the custom taxes had to be paid by the recruiting company, and this was to be checked by the public authority. This was another important element. And third, another important staff that can be checked by all of the different stakeholders that are part of this process. So the company is responsible for ensuring the right visa for the migrant working population. These had to be clear and transparent for all of the economic sectors. So all of this paperwork had to be provided. And fourth, that another mechanism was track down mechanism was established, and I would like to underline that. And because if they move from one farm to another, these must be clearly tracked down, and these allowed us to comply with proper health conditions all over the place. And then fifth element, we had daily checks of the working condition of the migrant workers, and also any healthcare expenses must be paid by the employers. And considering that that all of these, when a worker was moving throughout the countries, this could not be tracked down. This can be done right now, and this allowed us to check all of these. And the migrant people also are properly informed about their rights and about the work they're going to do. And it's very interesting in the case of certain kinds of population that are migrating from Panama. All of these information were provided in the native language of this population. And we also have provided mechanisms for people to safely go back to their country. And the last company that for which the workers worked for is got to pay for the workers to go back to his country, his country safely. And I would like to add some other consideration in terms of the protocols. First of all, there was a very active participation of the employers who engaged themselves during all of the recruitment process, and they tracked down all of the movement of the worker from the beginning to the very end, and which was something that was not clearly done by the employers before this agreement. And then we had a number of public authorities that are working in synergy and got better coordinated and a more integrated vision about migrant workers and migration. And the third element is the fact that we made use of technology to have a more coordinated kind of work and to integrate different systems to have a clearer vision of the migration phenomenon in real time in order to to track down all of the data that we needed. This system is called SICLAM. In this moment, there's a big challenge ahead. So these two innovative elements were now in place, but we need to keep them working because these are very big step forward in favor of a fair recruitment process. But we need these are should not be an exception because of the epidemic, but these modalities should be translated into into the new normal. And in midterm with objectives, we have a new perspective in terms of labor migration. We have now a different vision, and we can see that people moving from one country to another are people of value, and they do a work that is extremely important. And it's also important to have a common vision for all of the region, and we have to share the same language. And we need some strong institutional support to ensure a continuous quality project, and that it goes beyond the pandemic, as for the bilateral agreements with Panama and Nicaragua. And it's important to add a good circular migration, to have this institutional help, and to have sectors well coordinated between them in order to have much a better organized kind of governance. I would like to highlight this aspect, the fact that so many institutions are coordinating, are now working together, is super important. And the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and the ministers of labor and social security of Costa Rica, Panama, and Nicaragua are working together. And during our last meeting, we agreed that we want to have a temporary workers agreement for the sub-region that is taking into account all of the needs of each country, and will involve all in relevant authorities with the support of the ILO. So, and a cooperation on fair and ethical collaboration in our sub-region will have to highlight, first of all, the main migration flows, migration corridors, and they have to highlight the importance of temporary migration in order to have ordered and safe migration flows. And we also have to stress the ethical business practices, and this includes the possibility to have mediators that are closely complying with the fair recruitment principles when we need some of them. It's also important for these the rights to be portable. So it's important that what workers go to a country to work, and when they go back to their country, they're not getting all of their social security contributions that can be translated in actual money that these people may have. And it's very important in this regional agenda, sub-regional agenda, to stress the importance of social dialogue and between migrant workers and the organizations that are in charge of them. And the population of Ecunge in Panama, they have an interesting resource. They have messengers, they have representatives of these people that are keeping contact with the coffee makers in Costa Rica, and they deal with the living condition, and the people from the migrant population should be treated equally, and their rights should be complied with. And but this didn't happen for many years because
Cierro diciendo que el gobierno de Costa Rica celebra
the recruiters was not actually made.
de la iniciativa para la contratación.
So in 2021 the second phase of this initiative is going to come to an end, and we'd like to thank everybody for their support, and for everybody to realize how important migration is for some specific economies in different countries. And it is very important for it, and migrant workers are very important to provide a fair recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. Muchísimas gracias. Well, thank you very much to the minister. Well, the corn, coffee and banana producer not just waiting for the COVID-19 pandemic to be over to have their migrant workers that are so highly needed. And it's like going back to the last century. In other countries, there some people were asking to have even younger workers because they didn't have enough workers in their own country. And so the people that students that were not going to school were now sent to other countries to harvest coffee. And but this is a matter of value, but it's something that cannot be done. So we have to the government's got to find a way for people to move from one country to another safely, as you said, Mrs. Minister. And it's also important that health care protocols is another important matter, and this was the fact that the healthcare was provided. This allowed us to save lives even within the labor environment. Thank you so much, Minister, and I hope that these new agreements are part of the new normal, as you said, and it's not something that came up just for the epidemic. So I would like to pass to leave the floor to Mr. Donoso, the Ministry of Labor of Ecuador, and Europe is strengthening its public employment system and is building up the network that was established with the system of nearby countries. What are you doing specifically, and how these efforts are contributing to fair recruitment?
Estás mudo, senhor ministro, por favor.
Mr. Minister, your microphone is muted. Can you open it up?
Ahora sí.
Okay, now it's open. Thank you, Francesco, for this chance to talk to what Ecuador is doing in this important matter. As was said, I would like to say hello to Vinicius, the regional director of ILO for Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as Silvia Lara Povedano, the Minister of Labor and Social Security of Costa Rica, and Rafael Eugenio Rodriguez from Guatemala, and Luis Alcalde, Maria Alcalde, Secretary of Labor of Social Welfare from Mexico, and Tia May Lee, Deputy Undersecretary, International Affairs Department of Labor, USA. So to answer the question, Vinicius, thank you for that. I must say that recommendation number 8 is trying to promote public employment service, and this is to have a common fair mobility. In this context, Colombia and Ecuador, through bilateral agreements, have now a department to study how is the flows and to provide technological support to the two countries, Colombia and Ecuador. Now these two systems are working to consolidate a bank of vacancies, so this change information for people that are seeking jobs. This bilateral agreement can be replicated at a regional level. This bilateral action can be replicated all over the region, and with the aim to have this alliance, we have written protocol, and that is making reference to the public service of Colombia and Ecuador. And we had support of the ILO with 3 different servers for this public employment service to work better. And it's called this public employment service is called Find Job. And I would like to thank ILO for these 3 servers that have sent us with, and they were very generous to do so. And I would like really to thank this institution for doing so. The Ministry of Labor is keeping fair and ethical labor relationships, and I'm working with the Chamber of Commerce of Guayaquil, an important city in my country, and during a meeting, the Chamber of Commerce came up with this sentence: a good worker is wearing an employer's t-shirts, while a good employer is wearing the worker's shoes. This is important because we have to understand what is going on with the other one. And Mr. Sanchez, the speaker froze. We need specific public policies to create more opportunities, specifically to generate employment for the youth, for women and vulnerable groups. These made to make recruitment easier, and and a better regulatory framework that may allow everybody to work fairly. And Ecuador, in these months of government, these 5 months, first months of his mandate, has opened up to the world. The president of Ecuador says that we are all really opening up to the world, and we've invested $800,000 in improvement projects, and we have a co-representation at the regional level in 29 agencies that in this public stock exchange of Ecuador for work. And all of these activity, all of this institution is dealing with the private companies and is done that free of charge. And we are trying, thanks to all of this research, we are trying to implement fair labor policies, and many people have received capacity building seminars, and we have formed alliance with important institutions to include the youth in the labor market. And I must say that Ecuador, thanks to the ILO support and by signing bilateral agreements with Colombia, for example, we are trying to, thanks to these law, to generate new opportunities. We're trying to have that micro employers are not afraid to recruit new people, are not afraid to have more workers, because we need more employment to be generated. And we are working specifically for the youth, for women, and for vulnerable groups. So we want to attract foreign investments, and we want, now with the pandemic, we want to improve the economic situation of many employers. I would like to thank the ILO for these free tools, these free servers that they sent us, that are being helpful for the Ministry of Labor here in Quito, the capital city of Ecuador. And I would like to thank all of the other ministers from Costa Rica, from Guatemala, from Mexico, from the United States. And we are very eager to work together to go to beat this pandemic and to have a better and fairer recruitment processes in place. Thank you very much, Mr. Donoso, Prime Minister Donoso, and we're always listening to your needs, and we've been having a chat with your deputy minister, and we are formalizing now the agreement that you talked about, and it's also important to talk about to ensure workers to work in the formal economy. And we had some survey about migrant workers, and we realized that 50% of the people were working in distribution platforms, especially migrant workers from Venezuela. And I tried to see what was going on, and I asked people, what do you need? A motorbike, a phone, and a bank account. So these people are not being asked anything else. They don't need any formal contract. So we are talking about 50% of the value. And so some it's very easy sometimes to recruit people because the system is very slender, but there is no formalization of the work agreement, and people are almost exploited in these cases. So there are some new jobs, but they need to be formalized. So thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And I would like now to leave the floor to Mexico, to the Luis de Maria Alcalde, which is the Secretary of Labor for Social Welfare in Mexico. And Mexico was pioneer country in terms of fair recruitment. And was very successful in this. This program has been promoted by the government in coordination with employers' organizations, trade unions. What is your advice to other countries wishing to apply for recruitment principles, and what should be the role of the Ministry of Labor? The floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Vinicius, for having invited us to this regional meeting. I would like to say hello to Mrs. Lara from Costa Rica, Mr. Donoso from Ecuador, Rafael from Guatemala, and also Tia Lee. I see her in the screen, and we welcomed her here in Mexico. So, as a matter of fact, Mexico has pushed ahead successful politics and guidelines. Maybe one is very symbolic, which is for the temporary agricultural workers between Mexico and Canada. And this has allowed, in a safe and orderly manner, to create a form of migration between Mexican workers who work for a season in Canada. So we have different entities that make sure that the contracts are duly signed, that their payments are safe and sure, and that all the different conditions are being respected, especially where these people will live for the season. And so even though we had the pandemic, we made and we signed important agreements so that this orderly flow of workers has been respected. We're talking about 25,000 workers every year who travel to Canada between 6 to 8 months, and then they come back to Mexico. And I believe that this is a successful example for the entire region. But of course, we still have great challenges in my country. We have huge internal mobility, especially workers from the south of Mexico. They come to the central states or the northern states of the country. And this was politics that allowed all the different responsibilities to dissolve. And so the outsourcing figure grew enormously. So in this way, we have the intermediaries or recruiters that exploded, and they inhibit the responsibility of employers. So what have we done in order to curb this phenomenon? Well, of course, we have produced a law that makes the subcontracting on outsourcing of people illegal. And so we only, obviously, it is allowed for specific services, but we're talking about 8 months that we have passed this law. So we have 2,850,000 workers who are now being acknowledged as workers. They are not informal anymore, they're formal. So now the owners of the farms, of the others who are responsible vis-a-vis their workers, for example, they have to register them in Social Security, they have to pay them their salaries, either weekly or fortnight or monthly. And so this has made all of these jobs formal, and we can control. So this has been a key element in our country. Another important element that somehow is linked with fair recruitment are our efforts vis-a-vis the basic salary, the minimum salary. For many, many years, this minimum salary practically lost 70% of its purchasing power. So this is the reason why several people, workers, need to find an alternative kind of job. It has to be adequate, suitable, because with a minimum salary, they just could not defend themselves from inflation. So how did we do this? We did this in a tripartite manner together with employers, the workers, and the government, obviously. And this has allowed us to protect the women and the youngsters who earn less in our country, but also for every worker. So we have increased by 12% the minimum salary, and this has allowed that recruitment has a minimum threshold for every worker. Another important element is the implementation of a new working model that strengthens recruitment and collective bargaining. Now, collective bargaining has to protect more than any other kind of a negotiation, whether by group or individual. So, and this has been done by sectors. And this has actually become a reality in my country, protecting the freedom to associate with the trade union and by the workers in our country, and at the same time protecting them. So these are constitutional elements that we believe are fundamental in order to have a fair and correct labor market that protects the income of all these workers. So this is a priority program that we have here, and it's called Young People Building the Future. So, of course, in my country, in our country, in every country, I believe that the young people usually had precarious conditions. And of course, with the pandemic, this became even worse. And it was the sectors that lost more jobs. So we have given priority to this program. In other words, young people from 18 to 29 years of age to enter the labor market. And I believe that this is the biggest program we have in my country, but I believe worldwide. In my country, we're talking about more than 2 million workers, and 60% are women, and many of them just could not enter the labor market because of all the difficulties. And today the government is paying a fellowship so that they will gain credentials. And so this has been done in the worst moment of the pandemic. So these young people had an income, had the possibility to acquire credentials so that they could find a job. I believe this has been successful, and it can be a good example in the entire Latin American region. We are convinced that when we deal with the problem of migration, we have to consider the reason why people want to migrate, because usually they can't find a possibility, a job or anything. So, like Mrs. Shannon Barrow was saying, we must understand the reasons why people want to migrate. So we have pushed this program for young people, also another program which is called Planting Lives. And so if people want to migrate, they have to do it because they want to migrate, but not because they can't do otherwise, because they can't survive in their country of origin. So we are convinced that we need a sustainable model, better distribution, and obviously we have to give a priority to the poorest and the most vulnerable member of our society. So thank you very much. Mrs. Secretary, I had the privilege of getting to know this program that you were mentioned when I traveled to Mexico, and also the idea to eliminate all these intermediaries, all these enganchadores, in other words, people who basically do illegal recruiting. So, and then these people find themselves into slavery, basically. So thank you very much for this. This is extremely important. We would now like to invite a colleague from Guatemala and the Minister Rafael Rodriguez Perecer, who is also a president of the Council of Ministries for Latin America. This is a very important forum for bilateral agreements, like Mrs. Povedano was saying, and also, so Rafael Eugenio Rodriguez Pellecer, you have a floor now. So there are several programs. So I would like to understand how you have managed to focus on a fair recruitment in all of your programs. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to the ILO, to Mr. Vinicius Pinedo for having invited me today to participate to this forum that I believe is extremely important. And also, like Minister Povedano has mentioned. So I would like to thank all the other representatives from Ecuador, from Mexico, etc., and also from the United States. For this sub-region, this topic is extremely important because we have to understand the reality of the countries here in Latin America, especially when we talk about migrant workers. We obviously, this is one of the important points when we talk about temporary labor markets. We're talking about 63% of international migrants are workers who are looking for better opportunities. In the case of Guatemala, of course, this is true. This is absolutely true. So we, since 2010, we've seen how these flows of migrant workers keep on increasing because of different economic factors. During the pandemic, obviously, this slowed down because of the closing down of the borders and also because of the sanitary issues. But starting in 2021, the borders are being opened again. And of course, we have also the problem of the returning migrant workers, because we have a migration which is not regular, not legal. And of course, these people find themselves in great insecurity in the country of destination. So, of course, what we want is a form of migration that has to be regular, organized, and of course, we have to maintain the integrity of the households of people who migrate abroad, and of course, it is important for them to be able to come back to a home and the family. So, and then of course, when the migrants send money back home, this is also extremely important. We were also talking about this, and somebody made reference that in Central America, there is a 26% increase. We're talking about a $31 million to up to $32.5 million per year. So in Guatemala, it's $14 million that we get from migrant workers sending money home. So these people usually go to the United States to work, and from Guatemala, according to the last census that we did in 2018, 1.5 million people from Guatemala. We have a total population of 16 million. So there's several people from Guatemala who go abroad and send money back. So this is a reality that we have to look into. And we've done this by acknowledging it and how we can improve it. So we have a national policy, which is called decent employment. And this is what I wanted to mention, because we have mentioned this in the Council of Ministers in Central America. And so this is a program for us extremely important. So of course, we have to understand that migration has to be an option and not a necessity. And so we need to get elements, we need to have programs like the lady from Mexico was saying, because we want our citizens to stay in our country. They want to migrate, but because they want to, not because it is necessity or because of the country of origin, there is no possibility to work or no possibility to have a decent job. And in several cases, obviously, in the case of Guatemala, they are looking for a possibility to go abroad, regardless of what they can find back home. So something else I wanted to comment upon is that as a ministry, we have acknowledged this situation. We cannot, in the short term, create a number of jobs necessary to keep our citizens here in Guatemala. But of course, we have work ahead of us. We are organizing meetings or seminars with countries that accept our migrants, like with the United States last year. We have organized two meetings on their visa, which is H23 or H2 or H3. So, of course, so the United States have decided to limit the number of visas they're going to issue. So this obviously is extremely important for us, because in this way it has allowed us to regularize migration. And also, of course, we need to promote a different type of migration. So we have strengthened the capacity of the department in charge of migrants to increase the number of people working in this office. And of course, we have achieved to raise the number of migrants that migrate in a regular manner. So from 250, we are now at 1,000 in 2021. So, of course, we want to improve on the numbers, but this has allowed us to know who are the citizens from Guatemala and that have migrated, where and how. So we have signed different agreements with the government of the United States, and the idea is to inform migrants of their rights, so they are going to be regular migrants and they are going to enjoy rights. So there's also a network of consulates, and also with Mexico, because of course most of the citizens from Guatemala migrate to Mexico first of all. So we've been acting as intermediaries, and this has been extremely positive. So for us in Guatemala, of course, we're going to keep on strengthening this. This is a short-term solution. But of course, what we actually want to do is we want to keep on strengthening our National Employment Service, also the Labor Inspectorate, because for the time being, it's very weak. And of course, we need to improve a lot in order to make sure that the working conditions are better. And so within the program, we have also improved in our capacity to respond, so that Guatemala can also be a country that needs people coming from abroad to Guatemala. So we have reduced the number of response from 55 days to 10 days, so that so if people want to come to Guatemala, the response will be very, very short nowadays. Anyway, so the Ministry of Labor and Social Security is now in charge also of making sure that whenever a citizen from Guatemala is abroad and needs help, he can or she can go to the different consulates. So we have advanced with all of these instances, in the limelight. And of course, also for employers, it is important to make sure that they know exactly that the tide is changing and that the situation has to improve. So we are working with Canada. We have 12 to 15,000 people who go to Canada regularly. And of course, it is interesting because the employers are always the same, in the sense that these employers always want to have the same workers coming for the different seasons to Canada. So once again, this is worked very well, and also have had successful alliances with different governments in order to promote regular migration instead of the irregular options or illegal options. And we have organized campaigns like the people you've seen in the video. These are the people in the video were from Guatemala and the people who have been cheated. So we are now creating a new regulation for, or a new register for all the people who recruit workers, so that we want to register these employment agencies so that any kind of illegal action will be sanctioned. And once again, we're also pushing for another program in order to train people for the merchant navy. This is extremely important. And once again, our citizens can also participate in this training program. I would like to repeat the importance that all this has for the sub-region. But like the lady from Mexico was saying, that those who want to migrate, it has to be an option, a choice, and not an obligation, or not something that they have to do because there are no other possibilities. I would also like to thank the ILO, because they are allowing us to talk about all of these topics, which are extremely important for us. And of course, we want to keep pushing ahead with all these initiatives for fair recruitment and for circular economies. And for countries like Guatemala, obviously, this is doubly important. We have to improve national working conditions so that we can retain our citizens here at home, and making sure that all the new processes for people who want to migrate, they can do it regularly, legally, and consider the government as somebody or something that will help them. So, and I would also like to repeat that we have to create situations of prosperity so that they will build at home a new future. And we hope that the new jobs that will be created here in Guatemala will allow people to stay in Guatemala, because people have migrated because of the lack of opportunities here in Guatemala. So we are trying to improve opportunities so that people will stay, and this is our main goal, together with the Ministry of Labor. Thank you very much. And once again, I would like to thank everybody for the initiative, because the topic obviously is extremely important. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Mr. Rafael Eugenio Rodriguez Pellecer from Guatemala. And I would like to point out something else. Of course, also all the government entities that are in charge of workers have to improve whatever they're doing. And I remember that you were mentioning that in Guatemala, you have to create the conditions for people to stay rather than to migrate. Well, anyway, of course, we have to work as governments in order to improve the situation.
On the table, it's my pleasure to welcome Deputy Undersecretary Lee. And I'd like to ask you the following question, Mrs. Lee. The government of the United States has stressed the importance of promoting decent work to tackle the root causes of irregular migration in the region. How do fair recruitment principles fit into this? And what steps is the US government taking to promote fair recruitment principles in the regions? So over to you, Mrs. Undersecretary Lee.
Thank you so much, Vinicius, for that introduction, for that great question. And thanks to the ILO for this excellent initiative. It is a great honor and a pleasure for me to be on this panel with the labor ministers of Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, and Guatemala. And I especially want to thank Minister Alcalde for her warm welcome when I was in Mexico about 6 weeks ago. So I am very excited about this opportunity to engage with all of you about the ILO's Fair Recruitment Initiative in the Americas. And I very much appreciate learning from each of you the details about the excellent programs you are implementing in your countries. So as Deputy Undersecretary for International Labor Affairs, I oversee the International Labor Affairs Bureau, ILAB, that strengthens and lifts up workers' rights around the world through trade engagement and enforcement, research and reporting, technical assistance, and diplomacy. In July of this year, the Biden administration released its collaborative migration management strategy and the related strategy for addressing the root causes of migration in Central America that we've been talking about this morning. These two strategies together reflect our belief that everyone should be able to find safe, stable, and dignified work within their own countries, and also reinforces the principles of safe, orderly, and humane migration. So in order to better understand the root causes of migration, ILAB hosted 9 roundtables over the last several months with over 55 unions and civil society organizations from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and the United States. What we heard in those sessions confirmed the critical importance of decent work to achieving that stability and dignity. Indeed, the lack of decent work is a core reason that some people see no choice but to migrate. And this is really common sense. Jobs that leave workers unable to feed their families, unable to exercise their rights, too tired or sick to care for their families. Jobs that push children to work to supplement family income and leave no room to participate in their communities. These are strong drivers of outmigration. And the opposite side is a job that pays enough to live a life with dignity, with access to rights, including the right to bargain collectively, that empowers a person to grow professionally and leaves time and energy to grow personally. That is a foundational part of what it means to live a good, fulfilling life. At the US Department of Labor, we are helping to build decent work and improve respect for labor rights, both at home and abroad. Toward that end, ILAB is overseeing more than $160 million in technical assistance in the Americas to reduce child labor, promote worker voice, protect workers' rights to organize and bargain collectively, improve working conditions in key supply chains, and strengthen government's enforcement of labor laws. At the same time, it is essential that when workers choose to migrate, they are not exploited by unscrupulous labor recruiters, which can lead to abuse and sometimes even human trafficking. The principles of fair recruitment are key. 1, ensuring that migrant workers are not burdened with exorbitant recruitment fees. 2, that they have clear, transparent contracts that employers respect. And 3, that they can retain their passports and other identity documents at all stages of their migration. The United States has some safeguards in place to help combat fraudulent and unscrupulous recruitment practices, and we are working to strengthen domestic policies to combat exploitative recruitment. The Labor Department administers temporary guest worker programs in agriculture and non-agriculture, the H-2A and H-2B programs. And we have a large team that enforces the rights of workers who participate in these programs. We are also working to renew our collaboration with foreign embassies and consulates in the United States under our Consulate Partnership Program to make sure that migrant workers in the United States are aware of their workplace rights and protections. And we are also making sure that employers are aware of workers' rights in the United States. Federal regulations in the United States set the wages that employers must pay to migrant workers and prohibit employers from collecting recruitment and other fees, as well as transportation costs as a condition of employment. Remedies for violations include reimbursement of unlawfully collected fees to workers, civil money penalties, and debarment where appropriate, that is, being disqualified from participating in the future. We strongly encourage sending countries to adopt similar policies that ensure that migrant workers are not exploited because they seek work in another country where they may not know the rules. To protect workers against fraudulent recruiting schemes, the Labor Department publishes a list of foreign labor recruiters in the H-2B program that enables workers to verify whether a recruiter seeks workers for legitimate job opportunities in the United States. In addition, the Federal Acquisition Regulation requires contractors and subcontractors to take specific preventative measures to detect and eliminate forced labor and human trafficking in their supply chains, and prohibits federal contractors from charging workers recruitment fees. Finally, in the context of the migration and root causes strategies, the United States is emphasizing the need for sending countries to develop and implement ethical recruitment frameworks for temporary guest worker programs. We support the ILO's Fair Recruitment Initiative, and we embrace its vision and mission. The initiative can help make progress towards safe, orderly, and humane migration. In closing, let me thank the ILO and the government, worker, and employer colleagues for this useful exchange. I hope that by sharing our ideas and experiences, we can indeed achieve fair recruitment for workers in our region. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Secretary Lee. We appreciate your words. Of course, please trust ILO as a partner in the implementation of these programs, both in the sending countries in Central America in particular. We also see the value of such an initiative in a context of labor shortage that the US is confronting right now. So we'd like to thank you very much, and queria agradecer-lhes a todos e a todas, e ao mesmo tempo excusar-me, porque la verdad es que no he sido un buen...
To thank everybody, because I haven't been a good moderator, because I haven't even look at the time, and we are a bit late right now, so we are a bit out of the original scheme. So sorry about that, and I would like to everybody to switch on their cameras so that we can take a picture of the whole group. Thank you. I don't know if Francesco is going to be the next moderator or if anybody else is going to be. Yes, Francesco, yes, they are taking the picture right now.
Muchas gracias.
Bueno, listo. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time and patience. And I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Claudia Conchert, that is going to be the moderator for the second panel. So thank you very much. And the floor is yours. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Muchas gracias, Vinicius.
Thank you very much, Vinicius.
Interlocutores sociales.
It's now time to move to the social partners and recruitment agency. We don't have time to answer all of the questions live, but we are gathering all of the questions and the commentaries, and everybody took down the questions, and we will answer to all of them. In the previous panel, we've seen how the government acted, and their role is absolutely key. And as we said, during the regulatory framework, and the protagonist of the next roundtable are those who are put fair recruitment into practice. And so I have the pleasure, I'm very pleased to introduce my panel. And we have here in our round table, we have Mrs. Juliana Marrica Sierra, Labor Director of the ANDI Colombia, which is the Employers Organization of Colombia. We have Shannon Lederer, which is the Director of Immigration Policy, AFL CEO. And then Miss Ana Ines Montanari, Public Affairs Representative for the EDEC Group LATAM. Mr. Hernan Ruggieriello, member of the International Relations Secretariat of the Confederation of Work of the Argentinian Republic, and finally, Mr. Joe Martinez, Executive Director and co-founder of Cierto Agency. So we're going to start with the Employers Organization of Colombia, Mrs. Juliana Marrique Sierra. I've got a question for you. In the last few years, the private sector has increasingly supported fair recruitment practices. One of them is aimed at eliminating recruitment fees and promoting transparent and effective mediation and recruitment services within a specific country or between countries. Then, fair recruitment is clearly a key factor in the employer's visions worldwide, and specifically in the Americas. Now, for the future, what can be practically done as part of the ILO Fair Recruitment Initiative in the region to advance the agenda? And what are, if any, the priorities for this action? That word is yours. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Claudia, and thank you, ILO, for this important invitation for us. This topic is extremely important for us. I would like to say hello to all of the people. Well, for us, as I said, the federal recruitment is a priority for us. What can be done to advance the agenda? First of all, something that is very important for the employers, that fair legislation that is clear, that can be easily understood and transparent, and may allow these people, these migrant workers, circulate from their country to the country they're moving to. And I hope that these flows are changing so much, and this legislation is becoming poorer and poorer and weaker. But it's important to recruit people with the right skills, and so it's important for these people to have a right form of recruitment. And we sometimes some recruitment policies are being deregulated by the informal economy, but this is negative for the economy. So it's right for the labor market to be fairly regulated and to have a fair competitiveness, and all workers' rights must be complied with. And to do so, these must be considered as priorities in any political agenda. We consider that it's very important to strengthen the social dialogue between business workers and recruiters to have a better form of aggregation and a fairer recruitment at the local, regional, and worldwide level. And it's important to have this so tripartite dialogue in order to analyze practices that may allow for recruitment and that could be sustainable. It's also important so these the employers, thanks to a better form of communication, they can provide their own needs in terms of market needs and what and how many workers they need, and these made it easier to have more precise policies in this matter. And we want to have a wider perspective taking into account that my labor migration must be comprehensively analyzed. In this sense, it's important that this ILO strategy must take into account skills mobility too, and there's a triple interest. There's a triple interest in to have a well-regulated migratory framework because people are being better protected within this framework. And I would like to highlight some of the items that we are trying to do as employer organization in Colombia. First of all, we have to recognize the crisis as a form of opportunity. So we have to change the approach that we are using, and we have to consider the migration phenomenon as something positive, as an opportunity to be better, to be more competitive, and and it's also important to have a fairly regulated social investment system, such as international cooperation, governments, and it's all of these stakeholders must work in synergy and in a coordinated way in order to have a real fair recruitment process. And it's important also to need to include in these policy making also the company that are managing the supply chains and are actually recruiting workers. And it's important also to take into account all of the steps forward that were taken by different programs in the region. And in our employers organization is working in important initiatives in order to have a real fair recruitment. First of all, there's a program, an inclusive program that is providing migrant work that puts in contact migrant workers with bigger companies in the country for them to work in their supply chain. And then we have a more strategical one, and we provide support to the company in order to better see their needs in order for them to recruit the right people for those needs. So in order to also reduce the gap between the needs of the company and in the workers' needs. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak in this panel. Thank you, Mr. Manrique Sierra. I guess that you've highlighted the interesting elements belonging to the private sector and how can policies can be simplified, and if we should take a wider vision when we take a look at things. And it's important to underline that migration is an opportunity. Thank you very much, and I'm going to leave the floor to the next panelist, Shannon Lederer.
I will post in English. Despite the progress made and the international focus on fair recruitment, the challenges workers, especially migrant workers, face during the recruitment stage persist, and they can substantially affect their access to decent work. COVID-19 has brought to light pre-existing and structural challenges, making vulnerable groups even more vulnerable. From a union perspective, which are the key challenges workers deal with in recruitment, and what steps are unions taking to address these challenges and ensure decent work for all? Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be with all of you today. Trade unions have worked for more than a decade to insist on fair standards for recruitment. So this event marks an important step forward in our long fight for justice. However, today's launch occurs at a time of dangerous and even deadly risks for migrants in our region. And it is important to take a step back and look at the context in which labor recruitment is occurring. The appalling treatment of Haitian migrant families at the US border in recent weeks heightens broader concerns about the commitment of governments, and notably my own, to meet their obligations to keep people safe and out of harm's way. Our countries appear to be unprepared to respond to the current level of human displacement, let alone the levels that we will face in the future. So I believe that we need much more serious focus on how we increase our humanitarian resettlement capacity and our efforts to effectively integrate climate migrants and others into the workforce. Unfortunately, governments like my own increasingly seem to be trying to misdirect asylum seekers and refugees into temporary labor migration programs and use labor recruitment as a tool to alleviate border pressures. This is dangerous for many reasons and must be challenged. Also happening in real time in my country today, workers of all types of immigration status across a wide range of industries are striking in record numbers to protest inadequate wages and working conditions. And millions of people, particularly women and women of color, have decided they are no longer willing to risk their lives to go to work without meaningful childcare support and safety protections. These actions are critical to force overdue improvements in labor standards that will benefit all the workers in my country. So it is important to keep in mind that the reason international labor recruitment happens is at least as important as the way that it happens. And recruitment that is undertaken in lieu of providing fair pay and conditions and social protections, or in lieu of providing humanitarian resettlement, can never be fair. That said, of course, trade unions absolutely support fair recruitment efforts and provisions, and we know what they should look like. That is why we continue to work with our ministries and our legislatures to call for a pretty clear agenda: binding regulation of the recruitment industry, including zero fees to workers, strict employer accountability for abuses, real-time public access to information workers need to be safe, worker-driven models for enforcement of recruitment regulations, and concrete protections for brave workers who take action to enforce our laws. The levels of desperation that working families in the region face makes it even more critical that our governments have adequate recruitment safeguards in place. We are making progress, but much more work is needed. But that's really only the beginning of the changes that we need to see. Trade unions can never accept tiered rights for workers, yet the vast majority of recruitment facilitates just that, the movement of workers into temporary labor migration programs that severely constrain their rights, the right to change jobs, the right to be with their families, the right to social protections, and whether through legal or practical barriers, the fundamental right to freedom of association. The abusive reality of these programs became even more clear amidst the pandemic. So now is the time to end the treatment of migrants as a contingent, disposable, on-demand workforce. That is not and cannot be decent work. Preventing abuses in labor recruitment is critical, but it's only one step in the much larger work that is needed to fundamentally reform the structure of labor migration pathways. In addition, we must finally win permanent rights for all irregular migrants, bring our laws into alignment with ILO conventions, and promote the development of good union jobs throughout the region. Workers will break cycles of exploitation and ensure decent work the same way we always have, through organizing and collective bargaining, as well as through mobilization to win overdue policy changes. Our members work in every sector of the economy. They come from every region of the world, and they have every type of immigration status, including undocumented workers, guest workers, refugees, and citizens. Unity is the source of our strength, and it is our path forward. Rather than turning away asylum seekers or expanding abusive temporary labor programs, now is the time to bolster our humanitarian systems. Successive waves of immigrants and refugees have always helped to build and serve and feed our nations. Today is no different. So in addition to fair recruitment provisions, our unions will keep fighting for robust resettlement efforts to welcome working people in need from all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shannon. And yes, absolutely, it is so important to emphasize the role of trade unions in championing the rights agenda. And I think you laid out very clearly, some of the real challenges that exist maybe today even more than ever, and the real importance to come together and use ILO conventions, but also hopefully the initiative we are launching in its second phase today to advance. Entonces, voy a pasar a mi siguiente panelista.
Moving to the next panelist, Ms. Ana Inés Montanari, from Adeco Group LATAM. Private recruitment agencies are a key actor for an effective labor market and to make fair recruitment real for workers and employers alike. And this sector was largely jeopardized by COVID-19. So, what can this sector do in the region to promote and effectively set up fair recruitment practices? What are the midterm priorities? Thank you very much, Claudia, for allowing me to participate in this ILO initiative. Since we were talking about the priorities, next September, we have worked a lot with the United Nations, and Antonio Gutierrez was specifying that it's important to cooperate, and everybody learned about that. And during the pandemic or in the post-pandemic period time, it's always better to find collective solution than individual solution, and cooperation is absolutely essential for me. And first of all, what Claudia was saying, the fact that we have to think of the existing mechanism, the existing documents that are there for us. So we have to use the Global Pact for the safely ordered and human migration, and we have to find a minimum form of consent to move forward. So we don't have to invent anything new, but most of the problems we have are just something that we had seen before. And so we had some guidelines to help us through this problem. So the second phase is the follow-up of the first part of the initiative, and we're working towards something new. And and this makes reference to point 6 that talk about just recruitment process. And in multilateral environment and with international organization, we have we are a recruitment agency, and we are part of a protocol. In the last few years, we've been shocked by the pandemic, and we try to build alliances with companies. And we've in terms of worked also in an international level. And we have now an association that joins together of the private recruitment agency in Latin America. So we have priorities that goes beyond my own competitor and within one single country, but these priorities got to deal with the transparency of the recruitment process and with the reliability of contractors. There's, according to an report, 42 people, 42% that are recruited abroad are working in informal situation, and this is very serious. And to wrap up, this cooperation line, this cooperation in order to have a good cooperation, we have to work for ourselves. It's fantastic to work with other associations, but we are in a country just like Argentina. In the last report from the University of San Martin, 99% of Argentina don't want any migrant to enter that country. But it's very hard to think that we should work to favor migration, and it's to and how and to protect the workers, because most of the time for these migrant workers, these work they have in another country is their first job. And it's important we all abide to the safe, orderly, and the global path for safe, orderly, and human migration. And we have all of our workers must be at the very center of the recruitment process, and we have to keep them right there. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Montanari. Well, some of the most important things to say that you share with us is the fact that consent is important, and it's important to use the documents that are already there. And we had a very hard time to negotiate these documents. And so thank you very much for what you've just said. I will pass the floor to the next panelist, Mr. Hernan Ruquiriello, that is a member of the International Relations Secretariat for the General Confederation, Trade Union Confederation of Argentina. Mr. Ruquiriello is, well, the ILO is launching the second phase of the recruitment initiative, and trade unions are an essential partner for this initiative to be implemented, como el recruitment assignment de la ITUC, and what can be done in practice as part of the recruitment initiative of the region to advance the agenda, and where are the priorities of action in the region according to you?
Hola, ¿qué tal, Claudia?
Well,
Hello, Claudia. Hello, Claudia. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate. So before actually answering your question, I would like to give you an idea of why the trade union movement is so important in fair recruitment, because what is at play are the human rights of workers, and in this specific occasion, migrant workers who are the most vulnerable ones, and who miss their rights completely. So fair recruitment is absolutely relevant, because subcontracting is a fraudulent manner, And so what we want is we want to treat people in a decent manner. We don't want them to run the risk of finding themselves where they are exploited and where their rights are not respected. So this is the reason why the trade unions revindicate this kind of recruitment that gives guarantees, that also when people see the right to free association guaranteed, and also decent salaries, and possibility to develop their careers, etc. So obviously, this platform is an extremely interesting initiative, so that it may become a space for training, for information, for mapping the situation of recruitment of workers as well as migrant workers. So I just wanted to call your attention that all these platforms obviously entails the possibility to have a bandwidth, the necessary bandwidth in order to connect to the platform, and obviously the ability to do so. So I also think that the visibility is extremely important, and also we have to understand that certain countries have huge problems vis-a-vis connecting with or to the internet. They have problems with the bandwidth, and so it's what we call the digital gap. So several workers find themselves in a situation where they cannot use these platforms because they just don't have the possibility either of connecting or the bandwidth. So, of course, we have a tool that we want to strengthen, and these are the bilateral agreements that we can have between trade unions and the central organizations, so that workers and migrant workers, they can have information and also the training when they reach a country of final destination, so that they will find the possibility to avoid being exploited. And I think that this is extremely relevant. So all these agreements allow us to work together and like I was saying before, to prevent any kind of a fraudulent kind of recruitment. In the Mercosur, we are working in order to facilitate the free circulation of migrant workers, and this contemplates in some of its dimensions what we call the kit for fair recruitment. So one is the promotion and strengthening of the public employment services, so they will become a space where workers can go and find the right information as well as the training, and also the answers to their questions. We know that public employment services can be more friendly vis-a-vis any other kind of office. For example, when you go to immigration, the immigration department, especially when the migrant worker finds himself or herself in an irregular kind of situation. So I think that these institutions can help enormously for these workers. Maybe they can even find a regular job. So another one of the topics is the regional qualification program for divided in regions. So I think this is a very important topic. It's important for a worker to see their circulation facilitated. In other words, their titles, their capacities acknowledged, so that when they go to another country, when they emigrated, they see their professional qualifications taken into account, duly taken into account. So we need multilateral agreements, of course. So, and then, of course, also the strengthening of the social dialogue. And I believe that the starting point should be that the workers need to know their rights, social protection rights. And then there is an Ibero-American agreement. And if people know what they can do and how they can implement their rights or see their rights respected, this is obviously going to be very positive. And then, of course, a global pact, the Global Pact for Migration that has been signed a few years ago, is a framework for all the social actors, for all the recruitment agencies to strengthen decent work, obviously. And for those workers who find themselves in an irregular situation, so they need to know that most of the migrant workers only have an irregular job. So of course, the regularization is very difficult, but if you manage to have it, you will immediately start enjoying your rights. Then once again, going back to the migration phenomenon, the Agenda 2030, point number 18, they talk about the national programs, so that this topic will be mentioned and obviously worked upon, because it has not been mentioned strongly, I would say, in the 2030 agenda. So we can do it at domestic level. Then I would like to close with something interesting. In other words, the ICM, which is the International for Construction and Wood. So they have created a group of migrants, a network of migrants, and they have the ratification of the Convention 143 of the ILO for migrant workers. I think this a great piece of news, so that this convention, because of course in this region, it has not really been ratified. So I think it is a flag for a union to strengthen the rights of workers and also to build a barrier against illicit or illegal recruitment. So we are truly convinced that we have to develop a social contract free of xenophobia and racism. So thank you very much for these minutes, and thank you very much for having invited me. Thank you very much, Mr. Ruggiero. And thanks for having underlined the important role of trade unions and to link it to the 2030 agenda. And sometimes we forget this, but I think that and also when talking about training and social security. So these very important topics for migrants, obviously associated to rights. Let us now move on to the last panelist, Mr. Joe Martinez. So Mr. Martinez, who is the chief executive manager of the Cierto agency. So you are in charge of a recruitment agency that works between Mexico and the USA in the agricultural sector. So you work on the ground. And of course, it is a fair recruitment model in line with the general ILO principles, and obviously for doing things in a fair manner. So in the light of what the previous panelists have said, talking about the challenges that fair recruitment has nowadays, what would you suggest? So if people would like to replicate your model, what do you suggest would be the best way to do it? So thank you very much for answering us.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And thank you to the ILO for inviting me to be able to share with you all just a couple points here. I think first and foremost, Cierto's inception came to be myself belonging to the United Farm Workers and a farm worker union, trying to understand the issues that workers face and trying to come to the United States. One of the things that we realized here is you need to be present in the communities of origin. If we truly want to know what is the true cost of recruitment, we need to know what it costs to go and recruit workers from their community of origin, inform them correctly, try to take any fear out of the recruitment process and any fees and extortion that exist, so that workers can truly engage and be a part of the recruitment process and help inform us when things are starting to go sideways. I think one of the biggest challenges that I needed to recognize when entering into fair and ethical recruitment is the reality that this is an ecosystem. I can't do this alone. It requires, and it's required Cierto that we work with multiple actors. For instance, we knew that we could not get this off the ground, and the only way we were willing to conduct and create this model is because we've created a network of partners that we work within in Mexico, NGOs, church groups, government officials that work with us to ensure that we're keeping an ethical and transparent model 100% of the time that we're working. Does this mean that issues won't come up, that we won't identify problems? No, we want to be able to identify these issues and create ways to address them and prevent them for the future. One of the biggest challenges that we faced is that a lot of folks, when we go into the business sector, the private sector within the United States and talk about ethical and fair recruitment, they see it as a social cause. And this social cause tends to take away from the reality that this is actually also a good business practice. One that we need to recognize is that I work within the H-2A visa guest worker system. This is a system that folks look at as a last-ditch effort to fulfill your labor needs. And we all know that that's just no longer the reality. Since 2012, we have seen increase in the H-2A guest worker visa system from 14 to 25% every year. And it continues to grow. What this tells us is that less and less do we have a domestic workforce, and more we're going to become dependent on these guest worker programs. And so I see that it's the responsibility of recruiters such as ourselves to help facilitate these connections with local governments, federal governments in Mexico, as well as the United States, that we partner with employers to help them recognize the liability that exists and that is inherent within very much corrupt practices that exist of recruitment. And part of that is further demonstrating that we can ensure brand integrity, continuity of supply, and lastly, workers that are coming with the understanding of what job they're actually doing. What we recognize is that I think agricultural workers are actually a skilled workforce. They need to be treated that way. Just in the same way that we look to treat others with respect, every worker that migrates should be treated with a level of professionalism that recognizes the expertise that they're bringing to be able to ensure that our country and our world is fed. So it's with those practices that we continue to try to motivate and encourage relationships with the private sector, with federal governments, with NGOs and social nonprofits to really create a network that can bring multiple eyes, multiple views of transparency to a program that continues to be riddled with issues. Just like a lot of our partners said, just like Shannon shared earlier, it's not the ideal program. You have this program that ties a worker to just one employer. They don't have the freedom to go to another place. So if there's an issue at that specific farm, it's either speak up and share the issue or go back. And this, once again, does not give a lot of options to folks who many times come to a very vulnerable situation where they don't have the means to be able to just denounce an issue and be able to sit there without work for a number of time. So Cierto really takes on that responsibility of ensuring that workers are fully informed before they leave their countries of origin, and that they're partnered with companies that want to do things the right way. And in turn, how do we leverage that social impact to demonstrate good business practices? And I have to be honest, I think that today it still continues to be very much a challenge. Ethical and fair recruitment is not incentivized. It's something that folks are starting to talk about more and more, but challenges exist within the private sector of not disrupting the supply chain. And I think there's going to be the reality at one point that we need to start to recognize that these issues will only continue to grow if we don't all come together to really figure out a solution and a way forward. And this includes not only policy changes at the federal level, but also business practices within the private sector, and then NGOs and folks on the ground that can support workers to really speak up and give them the support while this is happening. And so this is a part of what Cierto continues to try to conduct and figure out. And I think you have also multiple other issues that folks face within recruitment, especially in the Americas, is you also have a lot of indigenous communities that a lot of times that's not taken into account, that don't even speak Spanish or English. So once again, you're having even a more vulnerable population that doesn't have any representation, and which I believe it's so important to be able to partner with folks that know the members that exist within that community of origin to ensure you're serving that population the right way, and that we're able to provide feedback to continuously improve on how we conduct recruitment within the communities of origin, and then in turn connecting them with the proper employers within the country of destination. So I think my biggest, and with this point I'll finish, I think the biggest notion here is if we truly want to have effective, transparent, and fair recruitment and ethical recruitment, it really starts with knowing where a worker is being recruited from and demonstrating and having a process to verify that you've gone all the way to the communities of origin, that you're working to not subcontract any of this labor, and that you are effectively can demonstrate and verify that you are abiding by all laws and policies within the country of origin and the country of destination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Martinez, and thank you for highlighting the real importance to work from the communities. I think what you mentioned also, in terms of the role of networks and partnerships is really a point, another takeaway, as well as I thought that was very interesting as well. The importance of, in addition to the focus on rights, to also incentivize fair recruitment, and I think that's certainly something to take away. But congratulations for the initiative, and it would be great to see this further replicated in the region. Entonces, ahora estamos al fin de este panel. Parece que hemos agotado el tiempo.
So this is the end of the panel. We have taken up all of our time. So unfortunately, we cannot open the floor to the public. But I think that everything that has been said in this round table, it comes out that social dialogue is extremely important, and the respect of the rules is extremely important. So thanks to all the panelists for sharing all of your experiences. And before giving the floor to Francesco, I would also like to thank and to invite you. So I would like to ask you, please, to all the panelists, to turn on your cameras, because we would like to take a snapshot of this panel. Thank you very much once again to all of you. So If you could please turn on your cameras. Thank you for the picture. Thank you. So I believe that the photograph has already been taken, and I totally agree with what Claudia's just said. It's very inspiring comments by the panelists. So thank you very much once again. So this is the moment to conclude. So considering all that has been said, so where are we going, or where could we be going? So today's conclusions come from the representatives of the trade unions and employer sector and the management of the ILO. We have Mrs. Barbara Figueroa Sandoval from CSA, and Mr. Alexandre Furlan, Vice President of the International Organization of Employers for Latin America. And then our regional director, Mr. Claudia Cunhans. So welcome to Mrs. Barbara Figueroa Sandoval and to Mr. Alexandre Furlan. And to start with, let's start with Mrs. Figueroa Sandoval. So thank you very much, Francesco, for inviting me to accompany you, because we would like to thank the ILO for the topic. And I've heard all of the speakers, and of course, we see the need to keep on looking into greater depth how we can improve fair recruitment. So in this framework, we would like to point out a few points. So first of all, the fair recruitment proposal is an initiative that points out this gray territory. So the situation of many national legislations. So they have the possibility of doing things in a certain way, but unfortunately, they are still not doing it. So the legislation is not sufficient, maybe. So, okay, so we take this into account, and it seems to us that it is important to point out that, so even though this is not binding, I believe that, of course, we know that all of these principles are being defended and stated in different international conventions. So we know all about this. Especially so many countries have ratified all of these conventions. So these are not just good ideas or good suggestions, but when you ratify one of these conventions, this is binding. And notwithstanding all this, you have all the principles that can be applied in all the different member countries. However, all this needs to become imperative. And also for our countries and for the role that each part needs to have. So I think that we are touching upon a problem that has not really been dealt at great length. So you need to make the role of the social actors very, very clear, especially when in our countries, we have to create rules and regulations based on fundamental rights. And then, of course, our confederation is in charge of helping workers of all genders, and of course, especially the migrant ones. We have to point out that migration in our continent takes place because of need, because of the dire economic conditions of our countries. So, of course, we have to help these workers if we want to have a fair society. So this idea of a proliferation of private agencies that work in an illegal manner, that especially a fraudulent manner. So And of course, the idea is to avoid forced labor, human trafficking, and all sorts of illegal practices. So also another important aspect that came out is the current situation is to guarantee correct working conditions. So these and so when we talk about migrant workers, we have to make a clear distinction between those who are just labor migrants or those who are looking for asylum. So we must not confuse these two types of people who obviously migrate. There are people looking for asylum, and this is one thing. Others are migrant workers. They need decent work, obviously, with all the rights respected, but it's a different situation. Migration is a natural phenomenon. Obviously, most of our countries know that we've had migrations in waves since the very creation of the countries themselves. So we have to integrate different cultures and need to cooperate between different countries. And this is fundamental in order to consider different realities. So when we have a different migrating corridors, is a very complex issue. So if we want to have a decent work for these millions of migrant workers, we must work together. And so I think that bilateral agreements are extremely important. So between these nations. So I think that this is absolutely fundamental. And then ratifying the ILO conventions. This is a wonderful tool. It has been committed initially. So this has to be done by governments and then turned into laws, into domestic laws. So we want decent work for migrant workers. So we have to respect their human rights. So they have to be treated in a regular manner and equal manner. So once again, they have the same rights as any other citizen. So we have to make sure that these rights will be respected, but they need to be legal workers, legal migrants. And they also need to have access to a trustworthy information and in a language that they can understand. Sometimes we have information, but they cannot understand because it's in a different language. So it has to be clear, trustworthy, but in a language they can understand. And of course, I believe that the trade unions can help a lot in this sense. So this for us is a challenge. We need to inform migrants. They need to understand what collective bargaining is all about, what fair recruitment is all about. So, and also the inclusion of these migrants is extremely important so that we can protect everybody, not just the migrant workers, but also our domestic workers. So we would also like to point out that the trade unions have to be considered as entities of public service so that anybody can use, in inverted commas, a trade union as a source of information and training. So, and of course, also to help them in their career, for example. And so in this way, we can absolve one of our tasks. So we have countries in our region where informality adds up to 70%. So once again, there's loads of work ahead for all of us as trade unionists. And we have also to understand how we can have professional qualifications considered in the country of destination, and would also promote a mechanism so that migrants could also access programs in order to continue with their professional career without any kind of frontiers, so that they will be considered as professionals in wherever they go. So And of course, we need to have information and also how you can access justice. Sometimes it takes too long and justice becomes injustice. So I think that I believe that exploitation has to be ruled out completely, but unfortunately, these are situations where migrant workers become an army of laborers who can be considered as just illegal workers, and they want to be kept as illegal workers. And also, I think that trade unions need to have and to acquire a point of strength, because if there's any need for a worker to denounce the situation, to do some whistleblowing, it is up to the trade union to defend the worker so that they can have access to justice. And of course, we can also work in other situations, like, for example, in the different communities, or for the sector of care, and where women usually are in charge of this kind of profession, and also they cannot get access to their rights. And last but not least, to the fair recruitment phase, it is our judgment. We have to consider how we're going to develop pension systems so that people will have, whenever they stop working, they can access to social security, they can have access to a pension. And of course, this is extremely important, especially after the pandemic. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Mrs. Figueroa, for your kind attention. And thanks for telling us that we have so many tools in order to make sure that the fair recruitment principles can be supported, can be applied to everybody, into all countries.
Internacional de Empleadores por parte del señor Alexandre Furlan. Por favor, adelante.
El señor Mr. Alexander Furlan, now for the International Employers Organization. On behalf of my organization I belong to, would like to thank all of the other contributors to these events. First of all, the ministers and secretary and the trade union representative and the employers, the fellow employers of the region. This is nothing new. I remember that in 2014 in IOE, we joined the Federal Recruitment Initiative together with ITUC and ILO. And in 2015, we ratified the declaration that we have in Bahrain on the ILO commitment towards fair recruitment, and we had raise awareness in campaign, we exchange experiences and practices, and we focus on human rights with some specific project. And this was something that was born from the private sector and or in other cases from other sectors, but and it's would like to make clear that comply with the human rights and labor rights is the best business for everybody, and I say that as an employer. And it's something else that is important to emphasize, is that we're talking about competitiveness, and when if we comply with the national, international commitments in terms of environment and labor rights, we're gonna have a win-win solution. And some more and more companies now are applying their due diligence in terms of human rights and labor rights, and the due diligence is needs to prevent on needs to inform everything that concerns the country, the company's business in with a humanitarian or a human rights vision in mind. So fair recruitment is clearly a fantastic tool to prevent a negative impact on the workers' rights, and allows employers to have a highly skilled workforce. And we have just seen, and some companies in the regions are applying their due diligence thanks to fair recruitment, and they're having a better impact of human rights, and they better use their in their investments and the money. They don't have any form of sanction, and at the same time they are retaining talent and can access more difficult to access sector of the market. And these are way to have a level playing to level a playing field, and in order in the International Organization of Employers, we have 150 employers organization being part of it, representing more than 50 million employers. We have pushed in favor of the principles and guidelines for fair recruitment. We want to represent a good business. We don't want to represent those companies that are against human rights. We have to boost alliances, as people said before, and we have to bet on social dialogue. And in the Employers Association, we know that we have to do that within the tripartism of the ILO. We have to have a dialogue with the workers and governments. And in the ministerial panel, you can hear how many initiatives are being put in place. In the round tables, we we have worked to have we have worked with some workers association and the government to have a clearer guidelines. I would like the employers international organization is going to engage towards a much more inclusive fair recruitment process to comply with human rights and labor rights, and in order to find a better work for workers and companies alike. Thank you very much, Francesco, and for the opportunity that you've provided me with, which is well. Thank you, Mr. Furlan, for this vision of the employer sector. Remember that fair recruitment is not just a matter of human rights, but it's something that's got to do with business. It's a way to improve companies' competitiveness and business competitiveness, and it's a way to make sure that due diligence is in place in what all the companies are working in. So it's important to work in collaboration with the ILO, with the workers, employers, and governments all together. And I would like to say goodbye from my behalf. I would like to leave the floor to Claudia Cuniert, that is sub-regional director for the Latin America. So it's time to wrap up. We could move along and along, considering how important the experiences that have been here presented were, but it's now time to go. I would like to thank all of the organizations that work for this launch of the second phase of the Fair Recruitment Initiative of the ILO, and I would like to thank all of the people that participated, as whether as speakers or audience members, and for being so interesting in fair recruitment, the gateway door to decent work, and therefore an essential condition to achieve social justice we all work for. ILO will certainly keep providing a support and further develop a regional action and plan for fair recruitment, especially. Well, we are always, I believe that fair recruitment is the gateway to decent work. And I'm going to say that again. So it's an essential condition to achieve social justice. Social justice, that is something that we all work for. It's also a way to have an effective recovery that our region needs more than ever. I would like to wish you a good week and see you soon.